Welcome to the Windows Active Directory overview. So the goal for this video is not to turn anyone into a complete Windows Active Directory expert. That takes years of working in this stuff. And I will say, prior administrators that kind of manage Windows Active Directory are some of the best red team operators because they understand Active Directory, how it works. They understand kind of the mindset of an administrator. So if they need to go find passwords or find vulnerabilities, they kind of know what those common things are. But I want to give you all a quick overview of Windows Active Directory and talk about how it's laid out and why it's important. And to start all that off, if you're kind of new to red teaming, I want to talk about a situation that will make Windows Active Directory make a lot more sense. So let's say you have to set up a network for, let's say, 100 people in a company. You have 50 people in one city and 50 people in another city. Without any type of Active Directory resource, there is no way for you to kind of centrally administrate anything. Let's say you live in Chicago and one of the users from San Diego calls you on the phone, their password expired, and they need you to go reset their password for them. You can't physically go all the way over to there to the box. You'd have to set up some type of remote network software to be able to connect in and do that. That's just kind of a silly example, but Windows Active Directory, what it's doing is it's going to centralize and store so many different services, so many different other things, security, rule sets, and other things that you can all manage from one location. So if that user needs to reset their password, instead of it being contained on that local machine, you can actually just log into that central hub, change their password there, and those changes propagate out to all the other machines in the domain. Now, in order to set this up, you do join all these different Windows workstations to that central domain controller. So as a red team operator, I would ask, what types of systems are we most interested in, right? Are we interested in Windows workstations or Windows domain controllers? Now, the answer there is Windows domain controllers, right? They are the central server that's storing credential material. They're storing settings, configuration information, and if you're trying to pivot through multiple different domain controllers, you always want to go to a domain controller first and then pivot from there to other domain controllers rather than jumping between workstations because that looks suspicious. Generally, workstations don't communicate with each other. You jump between these, what I like to call domain controllers. It's kind of like the gatekeepers to other domains. So those are our focus. So I did want to walk through the RTFM here. We have a really awesome Active Directory overview page. Again, we're not trying to turn you into experts here, but just a quick explanation of how it works, how it's set up. So let's kind of walk through this and see what we got here. So it says Windows Active Directory is a service that combines large groups of computing resources into, like I mentioned already, one centralized hierarchical system. Let's bold that up so it sticks out. This system, which I've kind of already mentioned, is a domain controller, 9 times out of 10. Is comprised of user accounts, computers, objects, and Active Directory forests. Now, like I mentioned, in this centralized system, you have a lot of objects, right? You can have a user object, a computer object, you have trusts, and that's what this is pointing out here. Centralized authentication makes administration and expansion of computing resources much easier. Like I mentioned before, let's say a user calls from the San Diego office and they need a user account created. Instead of you having to go out to their computer to do it, you create it in the central database, and that user's account is going to automatically be accessible from that domain joined workstation. So really awesome. Now we're going to talk about an Active Directory forest. In my previous example I talked about, I said there were 2 cities. While with Active Directory, you can actually set up those domain controllers in both those cities, and they only manage their respective city objects, which is awesome. Instead of having one repo just full of all these objects, you can kind of break them out and sift them out, which really helps with hiring administrators too. If you have a really big company, you can put one in charge of each leg of that Active Directory forest. And because they're all joined from a central kind of parent domain controller, they can actually share resources if you specifically authorize. So back to the RTFM in the example here, we have a company called corp.local. That's the parent domain controller you see here. And then you have a couple children, and look at the naming scheme here. You have San Diego.corp.local and Chicago.corp.local. This shows that San Diego and Chicago, those systems, those domain controllers, are children of corp.local. Again, the naming scheme points that out clearly. So we're going to be using some of those identification practices to manipulate and jump throughout the domain. Spoiler alert, our target example environment has a full forest set up. So we have a parent domain controller, children domain controllers, and then we have a bunch of workstations below those as well. So common Active Directory object types, like I mentioned, Active Directory has all these objects. This is not an exhaustive list. I just wanted to give you some of the most common objects that I interact with all the time on Red Team assessments. And that's these three things right here: a computer, a user, and an OU. A computer, pretty self-explanatory, right? All these workstations have to be added to that central repo. So we actually call them computer objects. They get created and then they appear as a computer object in Active Directory. And then you have user here. User, again, is another object. Let's say someone new joins the team. You would go create a new user object in that central repo, and then they can access that account and log in to one of the children domains. And then lastly, we have this organizational unit, or it's called an OU. These threw me off for the longest time when I was learning Active Directory in the beginning. The best way to think about an OU, in my mind, is to think of it like a folder. You can put an OU, you can put another OU in an OU. So let's say you had an OU, and let's say you called it like executives. That's for like your executives of your company. You could add more OUs under that, maybe specify San Diego executives or Springfield executives. So it's just another way to lay out your network. You really need to remember, these are for thousands of computers, tens and hundreds of thousands of computers and users. So the better you can organize all those objects into these folders, the better you can identify what users do what. And the cool thing with OUs, you can actually apply different rule sets to each OU, right? So I said previously, you have like your executives that have privileges, your executives that don't have privileges, like administrative privileges in a domain. You can actually assign those privileges to those specific OU folders. And that's what the RTFM says right here. It's just a container. You can put containers into containers. Good example here, you have an accounting department of a company. They all may be located in the accounting OU. Now, I wanted to put together a quick checklist. Again, very common things that I do during a Red Team assessment, things I'll check. Windows hashes are not salted. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. Whenever you enter your password to log into a system, the system makes a hash of that password. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on hashes, but I'll drop some resources in the description below where you can click over and watch some videos on hashes. But long story short, if I have the password, and if another user has the password, our hashes are going to be exactly the same in the Windows environment. Systems like Linux actually salt those password hashes with other random data, so those hashes cannot compare. But one thing we can do with that, we can actually take a user, if we have their user hash, and we can try to replay that hash over other accounts. So if I have accounts on 3 different systems and I'm a bad user and just use the same password for every system, as a Red Team operator, you can try to log into other services with that same hash. And we're actually going to be talking through that in our scenario. We're actually going to do that in our scenario, so definitely keep following along. This one's a great one. Domain service account passwords may not be changed very often. This is tried and true. If your company has some type of service account that's maybe backing up files across the domain, there's a good chance they don't change that password very often because there's a lot of different scripts and stuff that use it. It's a very bad practice. So please make sure service account passwords are being rotated. But as a Red Team operator, definitely take a look at that. Enterprise admin accounts may be used to traverse forest domains. Enterprise admin, I like to think of as like God mode at the top, right? They generally, unless something's taken away, have total privilege over domain controllers and other things in a domain. So if you can get a hold of an enterprise admin, there's a chance you can remotely execute and pivot all over a domain. And lastly, domains should be using some type of separation of privilege. If you have a group of admins, they should have very specialized administrative credentials that only work against their kind of area of work. So if you have SQL database admins, they should only have admin access to their SQL databases. They should not have creds that work across the entire domain. So try to group and pocket those things appropriately. I mentioned that because as a Red Team operator, you're going to see a lot of times admins just have God mode to everything, and they shouldn't, right? They should only have the required credential to kind of accomplish their job and their task. So that's a very quick review. Like I said, we're gonna be traversing an entire Active Directory forest throughout our scenario videos, throughout this entire video library. So if this doesn't make a ton of sense, just hang in there. We're gonna be querying those objects. We're gonna be enumerating, checking out who has privileges to what, and then taking action based on those things in this huge domain. So go ahead, click through to the next video, and we'll see you there.